Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you're interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Today we have Sean Campbell, who's a founder and CEO of Cascade Insights. Hello, Sean. How are you today?
Excellent. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking to me today. We'll have a lot of fun. So the podcast is called Absolute Business Mindset. So what does a business mindset mean to you?
Well, it's interesting, I guess, because you're talking to somebody who didn't ever really dream of owning a business. I actually thought all the kids that were getting up for business school classes at 8 a.m. were kind of silly because I was a liberal arts major. So all my classes were at night and I was sleeping in. And then I ended up owning a business for 22 years, right? So go figure. For me, it's actually more an orientation of being in service to clients. I mean, some other people might put it probably more like in a mathematical sense or in a growth sense or whatever. But I do this because we can meet client needs and we can make them happy. So I'd say it's more of like a business mindset is a service mentality. You know, are you in service to others, both externally and internally? And if you can keep that mindset as you grow, I think you'll be successful. Because one of the problems with owning a business is it's kind of an ego inflation and deflation tool for a lot of people, right? And unfortunately, most of them just leave the inflation side of it on all day long. And so you very quickly forget how to have a service mentality at times. And I just think that's kind of key to success. You know, can you really be focused on serving other people as opposed to your title or things like that? Like as one instance on that, I regularly tell the team, don't introduce me as the CEO on calls, because the problem is it changes the dynamic the minute the leader is there. Right. And I'd rather actually be in stealth mode for a while and just contribute and let them shine to whatever degree they need to in that meeting. And then someday later, you know, sure, the client can figure out like I'm one of the two guys that own the place. But, you know, I feel like even in how you introduce yourself, you can kind of showcase that willingness to serve. And frankly, just to close the point on that, I mean, I think if you looked around, a lot of business owners even struggle with that. You know, if you meet them in a social event, you know, they're like, hi, I'm the CEO of a company, you know, and I'm like, great. There's a lot of them, you know, so like, I mean, I know it, you know, so I think there's just a bit of self-awareness in that, in having the right business mentality. There's I think just an ethical goodness in being focused more on a service mentality than even a business mentality. So
100% agree. You should serve both your clients and your employees, actually. And so I 100% agree that service is so important. And as the business grows and it gets bigger, often people forget that. And I think that's what Jeff Bezos did with Amazon so well. The service, to be able to provide a great service, was the reason why Amazon has just rocketed as a company. So I think that's super important. I think that's a really important point. So thank you. So let's talk about your upbringing. So what was it like growing up? And I know you did a degree in masters in communication, but just tell me a little bit about your upbringing, your parents, and sort of your education.
Yeah. So I was. This may not resonate with a full global audience, but I'm sure the movie's available to everybody. But in the U.S., there's a movie called Rudy that a lot of people are fairly familiar with, and it's about a kid who gets to go to school at Notre Dame. No, I did not go to school at Notre Dame. My dad maybe wished I went to school at Notre Dame. But it's about a kid growing up in a fairly urban environment, south side of Chicago, actually really near southeast side. So those folks that know Chicago intimately know that kind of neighborhood, right on the border with Indiana. And anyway, Rudy grows up there, a very Irish Catholic kid. Most of his friends are cops and firemen and blue collar workers. And that was pretty much how I grew up. My dad wasn't a blue collar worker. My dad was actually in insurance sales in the Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross kind of era, where there's only, 3 winner prizes. You either win the car, the steak knives, or you're fired on the sales team, for performance from that famous scene in that movie. And so he was a very hard knocks kind of seller thing, which is another reason I had no idea that I would I'd even enjoy sales later in life, or I would even enjoy owning a business. I wanted to be a college professor. That's what I wanted to do. I love to read. I love to teach. I loved everything about it. To me, it seemed like kind of a dream job. And that was the way my career was oriented. I was headed that direction. Then a girl intervened, and I decided that I didn't want to be a poor husband and wife combo. Although my wife at the time, or fiance at the time, decided she was happy to follow me wherever I wanted to go. We have this phrase, like, I'd follow you to Waterloo, which is where the PhD program was going to be, Waterloo, Iowa. And but I made the decision that I didn't want to do that. So I took this departure that kind of changed everything else, where I said, well, I still really like teaching, and I like the idea of this, and I really understand computers pretty well. Back in the early 90s, we called them computers. We don't really even do that anymore, where it's like cloud services, tech, et cetera, right? But I mean, that was what you defined tech as. It was computers, right? That was the way you call it. And so I was really into computers, and I had a knack for it, which was kind of surprising because, again, I was more of a liberal arts kind of orientation, read a lot of history and, that kind of things. And I fused the two. I said, okay, I'm going to go get a job training people on computers. And I went to this outfit called New Horizons. And they basically, back in that era, there were just armies of companies that were just training legions of office workers to move from paper to digital environments. So I had, all that was going on, right? And so I trained people on Office and Windows and all that kind of stuff. That job, interestingly enough, I showed up and there were 30 instructors, and 6 months later, I was the only one of the 30 still standing. This was basically a churn factory. This was not a great place to work. But when you were teaching, it was great. Just the management wasn't great. All kinds of interesting stories from there that no one will want to go through except for the story. And so I ended up leaving that, and I took another job as a trainer. Meanwhile, prior to that, I'd finished my master's degree and stuff like that in communications. And then I found myself with the opportunity to move to Portland with my spouse from Chicago. And we took it because we wanted to kind of have our own little place away from, the influence of in-laws, great in-laws, but just wanted our own little spot. And I show up there and I meet these two guys, Bob and Scott. And lo and behold, about 10 months later, we say, it'd be kind of cool to start our own business, and we'll go off and become independent trainers, but marketing under the same umbrella. And that moment was what launched owning a business. And so that that step basically put me on the road to launch Three Leaf Solutions, which eventually we owned and grew and sold eventually in 2006. And then Cascade Insights is the company that I've owned since 2006 with Scott. Bob's a great guy, but in full disclosure, we didn't get along as well as Scott and I did. So the third leaf, as we used to say, out of Three Leaf Solutions, went elsewhere and did his own entrepreneurial journey. And Scott and I founded Cascade Insights and have run it ever since. And inside Cascade Insights, just to kind of bring the story up to the present day, I handle all of the sales and the marketing and all of the finance and legal stuff. And I have a team that's underneath me for that. And Scott runs our research division, which drives a lot of the lion's share of the work itself. But I'm the side of the company that's trying to identify and bring that work in. And then one other small piece that I do is I also have a small piece that's actually an active consulting team. That's our marketing team that does some outbound work. But yeah, that's basically it. And Cascade's about 30 people and spread out across the US, and we're having a good time. But there's obviously things we could dig into on that journey.
Well,
there's all kinds of stories.
Should we just finish the interview? You've done everything.
Yeah, we just finished, right?
2 minutes.
No, but I thought just briefly we could give a trajectory. Yeah. And then we can do all good history shows. Well, now we're going to go to episode 1, right? And we're going to talk about what happened at X stage. So you can just let me know where you want to jump back to and we'll talk about it.
Okay. Thank you. Well, let's move on from the degree and the master's. I think it was important, as you said, it was you learn how to learn, which is important especially I did what you'd call a liberal degree and didn't do anything with it particularly, but it teaches you how to learn and how to assimilate information, how to write, etc. But let's jump to your technical instructor role, where you were dealing with networking, databases, and programming at the start of your career. And so you said that there was a trajectory where you started working with computers and you were good at it. So was that software you were initially working with, and you were teaching people how to use software?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I wasn't teaching them how to build machines, but I was teaching them how to use software. So a lot of the people in the classroom were people who had not even used a graphical user interface. If you chart the trajectory of software back then, Windows for Workgroups, Windows 95 was kind of a new thing. And people previously had been used to DOS and non-graphical interfaces, for things. And so there was a huge need for people to kind of pick that stuff up. Although as a brief footnote, it also led to people really knowing not at all what to do with things like the mouse. I remember one student put the mouse on the floor and tries to use it as a foot pedal. Like it was a sewing machine, I guess. I don't really know. As many people who taught in that era had stories of somebody opening the CD-ROM tray and somebody putting their drink in it like it was a cup holder. I mean, there were. It's hard to imagine because we joke about certain groups, whether it's by age or whatever, or our parents not getting tech. But if you really look at the world's collective IQ with tech, it's massive now. Back then, there was this incredible gulf from people who really, truly had no idea what to do with tech. It was like horse and buggy to car, right? There, the last story, there was the last job I had before I went and moved out to Portland was at this great place called Metamore, but in Chicago. But there was a woman there. This was circa 97, 98. She literally printed every significant email and walked over to a file cabinet and put the email in it, because it needed to be documented. Yeah. I mean, the thought of that today would printing your inbox. Like who would do that? Not forget about the ecological disaster that would result as far as that goes. But I mean, regardless, it just seems silly. Right. And so I felt like in a way I was at a time, I didn't really realize that was the time frame I was in, but I was at this time where there was this just massive shift in people moving from a very analog office life to the beginnings of a digital one.
Yeah.
And there was just a huge amount of training and learning that had to go on. So I taught a lot of people a lot of software for quite a while at that period.
It's really interesting. I was talking to my daughter last night. My daughter is 8 years old. I am 42. And I was saying that I was about 14, so about 94, something like that. Our school, I was in sort of high school, I was in secondary school, and our school built a computer center. And everyone in every class had a session a week in this computer center. And you, as you say, it'd be basic software, mainly software and using Word and using Access and using all these sort of word systems. Anyway, and this completely blew her mind that there was no mobile phones, there was no laptops. Right. I was telling her about desktop computers, and she's just like, "Well, you had to be box under your table." I'm like, "Yeah, that was our computers." And it really gave me a bit of a reflection point later on after I got to bed. And it's so for my generation that didn't have the internet when I was growing up, we used to have like IT departments, and that was what anyone did with computers. And that was now there is, yes, there are IT departments who do support for offices and corporates and things like that. But technology is now embedded in our business all across. We now use laptops every day. Email is instant. We've got WhatsApp and Facebook and all these other ways of being able to use the technology. Technology has become so embedded. It's now not information technology. It's now part of business. And I suppose for you, teaching people at that early stage, you were teaching people that were they had no grasp of what they were trying to do on these.
None at all, as evident by many things. Yeah.
But what was the motivation for them going to do your course? That was the question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, a lot of it was their organization made the move, right? I mean, like they had just decided it was time to upgrade. And so this wasn't an individual motivation in a lot of cases. It was their organization had made the next big leap, and it was time to go do that. So we would get, government agencies that would send their employees. We'd get local businesses, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But yeah, there was a huge amount of learning challenges. People kind of came into that. For sure. And you're right. Things have definitely changed from the era of the computer center and, the desktop and just explain to someone the size of your average desktop monitor from 20 years ago. Right. The last thing on that is that I say to people sometimes, I entered computing before color because my first monitor was Hercules monochrome. And they're like, there were monitors without color. And I'm like, yeah, believe it or not, there was an era where we thought that was productivity. Yeah. A single one tone just used throughout the entire screen. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride from a technology standpoint. And I feel like it's been fun to see because I'm 51, so slightly older than you, but I've seen a few of these evolutions on the tech side, and it's been interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think Web 3.0 is going to massively change things like blockchain and AI are going to.
Oh, yeah. There's a huge. Yeah, that's a whole different podcast. But yeah, there's a huge metaverse, blockchain, Web 3. You know what I mean? All of that stuff is like the next platform.
Yeah.
And this is a little bit more of a historical note as much as anything else. When you change the underlying infrastructure that much, the same winner doesn't usually win out the next time around, And so there's not only going to be technology change, but there's going to be like, who's at the top? And it might not even be a company we've ever heard of. That's the way it usually works. I mean, whether it's, you go back to any major technology shift, railroads, internet, industrialization, the companies we heard about at the end of that period were not usually companies we were intimately aware of before the change happened.
Yeah.
And so, but as a side note, that's one of the things that keeps us in business, is that, being aligned with tech, it sounds a weird thing to say, but I think it's kind of true. It's never really stable.
No.
Right. There's always churn in the leadership profile. I mean, compared to, let's say, automotive, right? How often do we truly see a new automotive manufacturer that sticks around, right? It doesn't usually really happen. And so, but in tech, we're used to a lot of kind of toppling of the leaders. And I personally find that really fascinating, what keeps it interesting for me.
Yeah. I saw something on social media a couple of days ago, and I'm going to butcher it, and I can't remember if it's Intel or Dell, so maybe you might be able to help me. They had where Apple was, the value of Apple in something like 1990 or something like that, 1989 versus Intel. I think it was Intel. And Intel was a massive company.
Oh, yeah.
$1 billion company, and Apple was like hundreds of thousands of pounds or something, dollars, whatever. And they said like 20 years later or 30 years later, Apple's just gone straight up and the value of their business is now $1 trillion. And there you've got Intel, which is just decreased and decreased and decreased its relevance. And I think you're absolutely right. The winners of Web3 might not even be companies at the moment yet. The development of these companies can absolutely explode. And as you say, the winners, your Amazons, your Apples, those sorts of people might be irrelevant in 20 years' time. Like e-commerce might be something completely different, and Amazon fades into insignificance. I think that's why tech is so interesting, is that, as you said, it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. And that's what keeps people's interest and the fascination by it, because it's constantly evolving. So sorry, I'm on my soapbox there. I'll pause there for a minute. So you moved on to, and you set up 3-leaf solutions, and you said there was in the end there was 2 leaves and another leaf going in a different direction. But why don't you just tell me a little bit about the business? I've got here was a B2B tech industry, a technology company. Why don't you just tell me a little bit about it, how it was set up, and
yeah. Well, so we had a real fortuitous event, which was when we left Eris Corp, which was one of the training outfits that I was working with along with Scott and Bob. So it was a corporation that did a lot of this kind of training of people. At that point, I was training people on things that wasn't like end user productivity. It was like networking, databases, programming, that kind of stuff. Yep. And to be clear, like I was doing databases at the time, Scott was doing developer, and Bob was doing networking. Eventually I picked up some of those other skills. So as we launched into that new business, we were kind of gifted a relationship with Microsoft. And what happened there was we were doing for our current company, building out these kind of presentations, technical briefs, what in the vernacular at the time was called technology evangelism, which is not used nearly as much anymore. But it was this idea sponsored by this guy named Guy Kawasaki, who oddly enough worked at Apple at the time, back in the day. And he believed that you needed to kind of evangelize the technology to the masses. And I'm not going to try to do justice to like a definition of technology evangelism right now, but like, cause it's a whole topic unto itself, but it's this idea of evangelizing the technology. And so we were, guys who could train and communicate, and we understood technology pretty well. So Microsoft needed people to like write a paper about the new technology, or put together a demonstration application that showed off the new technology, or give a talk to like 200 potential customers about the technology. And so we were doing this kind of work for Microsoft along the side. And when we left, for some reason, I have my suppositions, but it's, as young men at the time, we didn't really probe too much. Our boss said, you can continue to do this work with Microsoft. You just have to give us a 10% cut of whatever you make over the next year. And I remember at the time we were always grumpy writing that check, but it ended up being a really good thing for us. So, and probably the reason he did it might be the reason people would guess, is that he didn't want to all of a sudden say, oh, we built this relationship with this team in Microsoft, and just because these guys left the company, you don't have access to them, right? He wanted to maintain his relationship with Microsoft in other areas where he was doing work with Microsoft, which was a lot of training. So I think that's how it played out. So we ended up having this relationship with Microsoft, and to the points we were talking about, this oddly correlates the history conversation we were having. Microsoft was huge back then. They were actually considered cool back then, oddly enough. I mean, talk about market dominance. I mean, today, if you get a phone, it's Android or Apple, right? Pretty much. I mean, there are other phones that no one can recall, even if they were under penalty of death, that exist, right? But there are two phones, and those are the ones everybody remembers. That's not 97% market share.
Yeah.
I mean, Windows was like crazy amount of market share, which is why they got sued, of course. But and that led to some predatory practices. But we were interacting with this behemoth as three young men doing projects for Microsoft when they were cool, they were huge, and everyone on the planet only used their stuff. And if someone's listening and they're like, well, everyone on the planet uses Apple, again, Apple does not have 97% market share on phones. Like, if you didn't go through the era, you don't really understand what that was like. Yeah. It's like if 97% of cars were Teslas, that would look really weird on the road, right? Yeah. And so what happened, and the reason I emphasize that so much about our trajectory, is we ended up getting the best education you could ever imagine on like big company software, what huge tech companies do, what drives marketing decisions in these companies, what drives sales decisions, what drives product development. Because for the next 5-6 years, we did this huge amount of work for Microsoft. We did work with most of the major product teams in the company. We did all this technology evangelism work where we were dealing with brand new technology and trying to kind of market it and espouse it to the masses. And then we ended up getting a very similar relationship with Intel. Only a few years after. So in the era of Wintel, where they were like everything, and that Intel stock was amazing, right, compared to the Apple stock. Yeah. We were working with both guys. And so what ended up happening is not only did we grow a company, and we ended up with a company that was like $2.5 million in revenue and like 20 plus, mostly contractors, some employees. But they were pretty dedicated contractors in a lot of ways to us. It was great. It was this amazing educational spin up. And there's so many things we learned by being to work with these guys in their ascendancy that we've applied years later and has been super beneficial. There was a dark side to that model, though, is that almost all of our revenue came from both companies. Right. So we were like the equivalent of a supplier to Airbus, who the only other person they could sell to is Boeing, but their Airbus contract says you can't sell to Boeing, right? And they're stuck just selling parts to Airbus, right? Yeah. And they grow this huge company, and the stress of, in essence, kind of being beholden to both companies, even though we had multiple relationships and multiple contracts and work with different parts of the company, we knew we had two singular vendor accounts, and all it would take is somebody up above us to nuke those things. And we were in trouble. And that led to a lot of different decisions when we started company two. But suffice it to say, it was a massive boost to kind of our education about the market and all kinds of things that are just really hard to replicate. I mean, it'd be like being that invested in, Apple and Google today on phones and being that deep in it. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's a little bit of the trajectory. It's
absolutely fascinating. I want to go on to Cascade Insight. So you actually set it up 2006, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So that was two people that set that up, and you've now grown and grown. So why don't you tell me, what does Cascade Insights do and how you've been able to grow the business?
Yeah. So after selling the first company, and there's kind of a story behind that's, I think, educational in a few ways. But
do tell me, because I actually love. I find it so fascinating, especially people selling their first business. There's a lot of mistakes that you make when you're selling.
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting. And I'll just tap a few things and then we can move on to Cascade Insights too. That's fine. But like, you can tell me if you want to spend more time here, but basically what happened is in 2004, we were just in each other's business too much. We, to that point about businesses can be an ego inflation factory. We were honestly kind of a little young and dumb. We had a growing company around us, but we didn't trust each other as much as we should have. It was the classic, like, I'm doing my job, but I want to double check on your job, or I want, and a lot of conversation back and forth. So what happened was Scott left the business in 2004 and we split it. And I took a chunk of it, and then Bob took a chunk of it. And then what happened was I grew my chunk to it started out with 6 or 7 employees, and then I grew it to 13 or so. And then I sold it back to Bob. Basically. And that was the journey. And the reason I sold it is part of it, I felt it was a dangerous business to hold on to because it was still pretty beholden to Intel and Microsoft in many ways. And at the same time, I had a very hard time separating myself from the business, mentally. And I think that is one of the hugest benefits of having a second business is I got to rethink my relationship to it. And that doesn't mean I don't wake up occasionally in the middle of the night like any business partner does and goes, oh, what about that? But there are moments of clarity where I can kind of be like, this thing isn't me. And the truth is many business owners never get that clarity. They don't. I mean, if you really ask them deep down, can they separate themselves from the business? It's not that common, right? For them to really feel like they're independent of how their business goes up and down. Mm-hmm. And so that was a huge thing. And anyway, after selling it back to Bob and a little bit of reflection on what I wanted to do, Scott was off doing an independent consultancy for those few years. He didn't add any employees or anything, but he was just doing a solo kind of consultancy. Mm-hmm. And we said, we really can make this work. We can get along. We can be more mature. We're very yin and yang to each other, very Penn and Teller, very click and clack, kind of we have a very complementary skill set. And I think we can be more mature men through this and do a better job. And and then that led to us launching Cascade in 2006. So, but it was it was an interesting thing because I'll tell you at this point, I will never ever forget telling a room full of people I sold the company, because there's no way to predict what people's reaction is going to be. And there's nothing you can do to really prepare people either, because the nature of selling a company, I hate to say it, is it's kind of somewhat done in secret for all kinds of reasons, right? It's not legal reasons even. I mean, for somebody who's listening going well, why don't you just tell everybody it's about to happen? I'm like, well, we won't want to go into that, but there's reasons you can't necessarily lay all that out on the table while it's happening. Yeah. And so you have this penultimate moment where you tell these people you've invested in a long time, it's time for you to move on. And then, to be honest, there's always this kind of, well, that's weird. I'm glad you got paid because you're moving on and we're still here. And what does that mean for us? And so, and that's a very microcosm transaction. We're not talking about a huge company here, but but the dynamic of what you have to do to communicate that change was, I can picture it today. I can picture the exact conference room we're standing in, the moment I told everybody, and kind of what everybody's reactions was. And I'd say the only thing I did that I think was smart is I actually took less money in I guess there are more things in this thing, but it's related to the employee's reaction. I took less money in the transaction than I could have. And what I traded that for was, I said, in the agreement, these employees cannot be fired for a year, basically, unless they're just robbing the company. Right. So everybody felt, and I could tell them that, you have a job assurance. You get to decide if you want to work for Bob, and Bob has to win you out. But yeah, so it's huge lessons on all kinds of areas when I went through that.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that with me. So let's go into Cascade Insights. So what do you do?
So Cascade Insights does B2B market research for B2B technology companies. So the trajectory continues. We're still working with big technology companies. they are, they're not just two. Let's summarize it that way. If you go look at the client list, we made lots of better decisions about marketing and sales. There's literally hundreds of B2B technology companies, and we work with really large guys: Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle. Apple's one of the notable ones we don't. That's kind of a weird one. So, but most of the large guys we do, and then a bunch of mid-markets and startups. And so we do research services for them. So they have problems with sales, marketing, product, and we will go research it and figure it out. And then the other thing we do is, once that decision is made as to what they need to go do, we will, at least on the marketing side, we'll sometimes help them develop those strategies and tactics they need to go execute on. And Cascade got its start because we, at the end of the first company, realized we really liked doing competitive analysis work. Right. And we said, why don't we form a competitive intelligence company? Actually, we have so for a few years, a good 4, 5, 6 years, we ran mostly as competitive intelligence research in tech, and that's a fascinating journey unto itself. If you're in that industry, as you might guess, there are plenty of white hats and there's lots of black hats. There are people who will do things that we would never aspire to. We were fairly white hat research in terms of, we'll interview your ex-customers, we'll interview ex-sellers, we'll talk to people that, but we weren't out there like diving in a dumpster trying to find a product roadmap, of which there are actual people that will try to do that. So that was kind of how we started. And then we realized that market was a little bit, it was fascinating, but it was kind of narrow. And it also had the issue of, it's much harder to work with two companies in the same space if you're doing competitive intelligence work, obviously. So there was a lot of like barriers to working with kind of new clients. And we said, a lot of the skills here are the same that we could use if we do broader market research activity. And that's the pivot we made 7, 8, 9 years ago. And that's set us on the trajectory we're at now. But yeah, that's kind of how that company evolved from a service profile standpoint.
And I don't want to know numbers, like revenue number. I don't want to know that, but you're growing still. You're hiring more. Yep. How do you balance between contractors and full-time employees? How have you built your business that way?
We don't really have a lot of contractors. We have a few in one department of the company that does market research recruiting, but we very focused on full-time employees. Our first business was predominantly contractors. And while there was the elasticity benefit, there's always this challenge of, can you orient people culturally the way you really want them to? And can you ensure quality in the way you want? Trade-off of full-time employees, of course, is that monthly payroll number that you try not to stare at too much, if it's been a bad month. Side note on that, we use Gusto for payroll. And one of the emails I kind of wish it never sent me. I've never said this in a podcast, but I think it's fair to say it always sends whoever's like executive leadership. Hey, you just paid your payroll. And it's always like in my inbox, it's like, I won't say the number so nobody extrapolates salaries, right? But it's like that number always gets bigger. Kind of wish it didn't in a way, in a small way, right? Because it's always slightly intimidating to stare at something that's, hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever it is. Right. And, so we're all based on full-time employees and that's kind of the way we set stuff up.
Thank you. What type of leader are you?
Wait, say that again.
What type of leader are you?
Oh, what type of leader? It's interesting. Like if I try to define it just as like a phrase, I don't know. I would just say a teacher. I'd probably be what everybody would. It's a weird thing. To tie the front of this conversation a little bit to this point, I had no idea when I started on this road that I would have all this opportunity to constantly learn as an owner of a business, if your mindset's right, and you're not just stuck, and just a million opportunities to teach. Now, it's not the same as the classroom, and I want to get back to the classroom. So I guess lecture sometimes, and I do think, I'd love to get back to the classroom someday. For one part of my journey is I spent 3 years when my kids were young, in an MBA program as an adjunct professor teaching like competitive intel and industry, and I absolutely love that. And I'd love to get back to it now that my kids are grown. Absolutely would love to get back to some of that like part-time stuff. But anyway, I have a lot of opportunity to teach. What I usually refer to though is less teaching and more apprenticeship.
Right.
I feel like I am apprenticizing all day long. And that's my leadership style. And I am like, come talk to me, ask questions, let's collaborate. And it's a culture thing we have to work through. You know, we bring people in, and it's funny, especially as we've grown a bit, even at 30 people, right? We bring in kind of a new person. I won't say what team to call out in case, you know, sometimes staff are listening, so I don't want to like highlight a team kind of thing, but like somebody from a team will, you know, talk to me, and like, it takes them a few weeks to realize like, I really mean it. Like, forget that I'm the CEO. I just want to help you understand how to do your job better. Right. And we can collaborate and work on a document. And so I would say that's it. It's teacher and a lot of apprenticizing is what I do.
Fantastic.
That's my model.
Fantastic. So I know you're involved in sales and marketing, and one of the questions that popped up was, why does no matter more than yes when you're leading a firm and managing your clients?
Well, that ties back into the earlier. Do you want to have a company that's just beholden to Microsoft and Intel and wonder if every night, you know, you're going to get nailed, or can you say no to the growth of one account to create more accounts? Can you not be beholden to that? Can you say no to bad business, even if good business isn't showing up tomorrow? Because the minute you start working on the bad business, it's with you for months or years. Frankly, can you fire people? It's not something I enjoy by any stretch. And fortunately, I can still count on one hand the number of people that I've fired over 15 years at Cascade. Right. But can you say, no, you don't belong here anymore? Some people wield that power a little too aggressively, but I know other business owners who struggle to ever use it. You know, bad performers stay in the building forever. So, and here's the thing from a marketing and sales standpoint specifically, it's amazing what happens when you tell a prospect you don't want that kind of work with them, or you don't want that kind of project. Because deep down, all clients believe you will say yes to everything. Deep down, it's what they believe. They would never say it that crassly, at least most of them wouldn't. Mm. But it's what they fundamentally believe. And so when you say no and you mean it, what you create is trust. Now, you might create a bit of fear for you because you just turned down something you could have executed on, maybe not perfectly, but adequately. Mm. But you have to practice saying no. And the same thing's true internally. One of my favorite articles I ever read about something like this internally was, I want to say it was HBR, but we'll just say it was because I don't really remember. But HBR had this article about, they did this survey of executives. And they said, hey, executives, how many strategic priorities is your company executing on based on what you've communicated? And the numbers were like, 6, 8, 5, 10, 12. Then they polled all the lieutenants of these executives on how many strategic priorities do you feel you have been given? By the time they added it up, it was like in the hundreds. Right. There was this disconnect between the leadership thought, I have been clear, right? And it's like, no, you haven't been clear because everybody's been inferring. And so what's happening there is the leader's not, when they're hearing an initiative spin up or they're hearing a set of employees about to embark on something, instead of just going, let's see what happens. No, this thing is in focus. This thing is not, right? Maybe someday we'll do this.
I think it's really important. What you're actually saying is that you have confidence in your business model and what you're selling to your clients, and actually they might come to you and say, I need this. You do your market research, you do your analysis, you about their company out, and there's a confidence in your business to actually say your business needs this, not what you think it needs over here.
Yeah, you can't let your business be shaped by demand entirely. I mean, yes, find new opportunities, grow in certain areas, that kind of thing. But way too often, especially for small businesses, if you really ask them how they got to be who they are, it's all demand generation. Like the demand drove them here and the demand drove them here. And there's so many benefits to kind of strategically saying no, in terms of shaping the business. And yeah, that leads to a well-defined, well-shaped business that, generates good work, executes on good work. And frankly, from a digital standpoint, right, this is a kind of a separate topic, but it's what people want to see even in your digital communication, right? Mm-hmm. The same motivation they have in verbal to, hey, you're going to say yes to everything. When they go to your website and you're not actually clearly delineating what's in and out of bounds for you as an organization, they try to hunt for that. And maybe they find that through referrals or individual people they talk to. I would rather define that ourselves. So like on our website, if people go to it, it's super clear. We serve this market and we don't serve these, and we serve these audiences and we don't serve these. And we hear all the time from people, thank you for the clarity. Thank you for letting me know that I could trust you, because of the act of you kind of digitally turning down business in a way tells me that I can trust you when I bring my business problem to you. Yeah. And that's, and frankly, that even ties all the way back to the very beginning. I just think it's being in service to people, to tell them the truth, right? At the end of the day. And if you don't start from there, there are plenty of not nice people who own big businesses. Let me just summarize it that way. Right. So I'm not saying being evil or non-truth telling doesn't create a business that's big. It certainly can happen and has happened through history, but it's not the horse I want to ride on.
No. I worked in tech for about 9 years in a big corporate. And what we found when we were scoping projects and building relationships with clients, actually telling them what you do and what you're going to do, but equally telling them what you don't do and the reasons why you don't do those reasons, then you don't get this horrible situation of scope creep where suddenly the client then says, oh, well, I want this and I want this and I want this and I want this. And you're like, well, a project this big, X big, is now hugely different because people's demands, people's whims in some occasions just change in their mind. So I think that's super important for entrepreneurs and business owners to realize that. So you said that you use less contractors and you're now employing more people. How important is culture for you as a business owner?
I think it's super important. Maybe not for the traditional reasons, though. I usually summarize it as culture is what guides people when you're not talking to them.
Right.
At the end of the day, because especially in virtual companies, right? How often is your employee talking to a client when senior leadership isn't around? Certainly some of the time. How often are they deciding on what to do? I think culture's kind of been weirded out in a way. It's kind of like turned into this, like, what can we offer as cultural gifts to our organization? Like a better cafeteria, a better whatever, right? In big companies. And at the end of the day, do they understand the objective that they're operating under? And do they feel like they're part of a culture that recognizes people that meet those objectives? And I think that's key, right? That's what I think of. And so I think culture's crazy important, and it has to be modeled by leadership, and it has to be, it even has to be patrolled a little bit. I think, as the leadership team, you shouldn't let the company create its own culture organically. You have to kind of tell people the kind of culture that's going to lead you to market success and the kind of company you want to run. And I don't think you should shy away from that, because one of the benefits of being a business owner is that you get to work in a place that you like.
Yes.
And just delegating culture to the masses. I get the motivation, I get it. Like, but trust yourself, trust yourself that you know what's the right culture for your organization. and not just espouse it, but frankly, sometimes police it if you have to. Meaning, like, if somebody's just not following the cultural guidelines that you have, like, and to be clear, super clear, I'm not talking about social issues here. I'm just talking about like the way you relate to clients and that kind of thing. Because that's a whole different topic about how social issues affect a company's culture and whatever. That's a whole different thing. I'm just talking about the traditional business school kind of definition of company culture, right? And I think it's immensely important and something you got to think about all day long.
I heard on a podcast recently that I was listening to, and this rung true with one of my experiences with a big corporate that I was working with, that if you don't work on the culture in your business, it ends up just being wallpaper. And I know a company that I worked for that literally the values and the culture was put onto the walls. No one read it. No one thought about it. No one paid any attention to it. It was just those things that the business or the leaders had decided were the values and what the culture of the business was. And they weren't even being referred to. They weren't even being thought of. And so I thought that's a really good way of describing it, in the fact that it can just be wallpaper and no one pays any attention to it. So I think you're absolutely right. I think culture is so important. And it's when you're not there, when you're not policing it or monitoring it, are your employees doing what you believe is culturally important for your business? So I think
right, because by definition, so much happens when your business grows where you aren't in the room. So much happens, right? And the way you can rest easy is if you know people are actually kind of in the right lanes with kind of that decision making. And there's while we're recording this, right? The war in the Ukraine is in full roar right now. And, just to bring up something I brought up internally, there's strong historical precedent for leading this way. The U.S. military, the Ukrainian military, and not the Russian military tend to provide a lot of authoritative decision-making to lower ranks. But the way they can do that is they ensure that those lower ranks have a clear understanding of the culture of the organization and the strategic objectives of the organization. And thereby you can say, make all the tactical decisions you want, right? Just make them in alignment with the strategic priority and do so in a way that doesn't offend the culture. So, that's, and the reason I brought up the Ukrainian war is we're seeing it play out, at least at the moment. And I don't usually bring a political statement, but in this case, I imagine I'm in good company. Thank God the Ukrainians are doing a good job of defeating what it looks like, what may be defeating a Russian invasion in the end. Yeah. And there's many people that have said one of the reasons they're doing that is they obviously have a core set of values that they're culturally aligned, that anyone can see that from social media through to the news stories we hear. And at the same time, they have a very decentralized military command structure, has been written up a few different times by other articles, somewhat emblematic of ours. And the Russians have a completely different model. And you're seeing it even play out on something like a military battlefield. So I think, this is just a perennial topic, and it goes beyond one individual small business owner's perspective from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And there's a great book that I'm reading at the moment called Legacy, which is all about the New Zealand rugby union team and about their decentralizing and devolving their management to all of their people. And they were saying that in militaries now, there are core principles on how you act within the arena, but everyone is making decisions on the ground on the basis of what has been decided as the sort of lanes that each of the different parts are in. So I think that is
right. Well, and one brief thing on that is like that, for example, like from a leadership standpoint around here, one of the things that I really try to do is, I try to limit the number of metrics that the teams that are reporting to me are reporting back to me, right, and say, give me a limited number of metrics that show we're meeting those strategic objectives. Because if you look inside any large company, you can build a dashboard that shows you were successful even when you're not, pretty easily, right? And so like I try to make it so like, no, let's just focus on these core objectives, these core metrics. Yes, we have other reports that'll tell us kind of what to do tactically, perhaps, but I never let a team kind of bury me in a dashboard that I can't actually see the real truth behind it.
Right.
And frankly, that's somewhat leads to some of our work, because some of our clients have done that for years and now they don't know what side's up, and they're like, hey, we need to go do research. And so I guess it's job security on that side of things. But I don't, I don't ever want that to happen here. But anyway.
No, thank you for sharing that. So what's the plan for the next 2 to 5 years for your business and for you?
Well, we're at an interesting spot. We've never been this big before. The first business got to 25 employees. This is now like 30 and change. And, we've already got all the issues we're creeping up about, how do we delegate more authority to middle management and, all those kinds of things that start to kind of come into play. Here's something that's interesting about Scott and I. Like, we don't tend to write strategic plans. We tend to focus more on, are we doing a good job and are we being successful? Like, we don't write, hey, I'd like to be 20 million in 5 years or whatever, because I think it kind of violates the service mentality. If we're doing the right things from a service mentality standpoint, we will continue to grow. And we've proven that year over year. Like, pretty much every business, the 2 businesses we've owned, they grew every year. Right. And I didn't have to like overthink it to get there. Outside of having, really focus on the service mentality and making smart decisions in that regard. For me personally, I'd like to get back to the classroom some. I really miss doing what I did with the MBA program for a number of years. I only got out of it because it was just too much to handle on top of a business, and I wanted to be around my kids and my wife more. It was like I didn't need a part-time job on top of growing a business. But as this business as we build in another, layer of management and whatever, might there be time for me to give back a little bit more that way? That'd be great. I don't know, that's the kind of stuff I'm looking forward to. So I'm just looking forward to nice, steady growth and, employing a good team of people, and, we'll see where it all leads, at the end of the day.
Thank you. Okay, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all of my guests. They're quick-fire questions. They don't need a quick-fire answer. They're a little bit thought-provoking as well. What's the best decision that you've made?
I assume with a business focus, right?
Yeah.
To get out of the first business, because I'm not really sure where I would have ended up. Probably no place good. I don't mean dead, just to be clear, because that sounded kind of dark. I just mean I needed to get out to kind of reset myself and say, can I have a different business? And along the way, my faith grew immeasurably, and that was a huge part of it. I'm a Christian, and that had a massive impact in my ability to kind of rest my concerns, outside of myself entirely. And so I don't know if any of that would have happened. And so from a faith standpoint and from a building a better business, that's a better one to work in for not just me, but the people that are here. If I'd stuck around that business, I'm not really sure if it would have been a good place for me in the end. So that's probably the biggest decision, getting out of the first one.
Right. Thank you. What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Read stuff you disagree with.
Oh,
nobody does.
No. Have you watched Social Dilemma on Netflix?
Oh yeah.
And that whole point of social media is just built. Everyone just looks at their own interests.
Right. Well, and Frontline did a great. That's a public broadcasting network show in the U.S. and they did a fascinating multi-part on like all that stuff that we probably don't have time to get into the weeds into about like what that algorithm does to like opinion shaping and whatever. No, read stuff you disagree with.
Yeah.
Whether that's history or whatever, and just put yourself on even if it's not so much direct disagreement, expand your horizons in a way that you're going to bump into things that just aren't really that traditional. Like a perfect example in the US, without saying anything about who or what I voted for, right? The last presidential election here was, let's say not an easy one for us to go through, right? Whatever side you were on. I got tired of everybody telling me different historical facts about presidents. So I decided I was going to read an individual biography of every US president all the way up to the current one. So right now I'm up to Harrison, who was just before McKinley. Okay. I'm about a year and a half into that journey. And it's been amazing because I'm like, wow, didn't know they had that same problem in 1874 or whatever, right? Look at how and so, but on the disagree side, it's definitely read stuff you just really disagree with. Like whatever opinion you have, go read a book by somebody who just believes the other thing. And the last thing on this, I'm not saying that means you get to some mushy middle. You may find that your opinion's reinforced. Fine. I'm okay with that too. But, and I'd say, honestly, that's been a big part of my own, it's weird to say individual success, but if I was to say something like what I think's contributed to me being successful in business, I'm happy to read stuff I disagree with all day long. And I just don't think people do that enough at the end of the day.
I think you're absolutely right. I think challenging yourself on a business point of view, on a political point of view, on a social point of view, a cultural point of view is so important. And I think we have you could call it an advantage with our press in the UK. The BBC dominates everywhere in the UK, and the fact that they will always provide different views on every subject. So let's just say it's a political. So where you've got Republicans and Democrats, we've got Labour and Conservatives.
Right.
BBC will talk about a subject, and they will have counter views and sort of different views all on the subject at the same time. And I think that's helpful for that, having that different viewpoint to just check, are you on the right path for yourself, is really important. And the other thing I think, which is super important at the moment, which is happening in some parts of the UK, is fact checking people's views on subjects. And that's something we're getting a lot more of because of certain politicians. There's one in the US who former president who made up his own story on lots of things. There's people in the UK who is doing similar things of just giving their viewpoint on stuff. I think fact checking is really important, that you're actually not just getting a biased view on a subject, and you're actually getting what are the actual facts behind it as well. So I agree with you, having that counter opinion against your own is super important. And I equally think this fact checking, which is coming into the UK's media, is really important as well.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, in short, it's funny because it's again, like one of the things that leads to work for us is like, we're in a meeting with a client and they'll say XYZ about their client base or what they think about their marketing. And it's amazing if all you say is some version of, upon what basis are you making that assessment? You know what I mean? And they're like, crud, I don't really have. And I mean, I talked to somebody yesterday, and you're like, okay, how about we do some actual research and figure out if there's a problem, right? How about if we go do that?
So important. Who's helped you most in your career?
Well, it would have to be two people. It definitely my wife. She's worked in the business for the last 22 years, both businesses, and more on like a finance HR side of things. And I mean, I don't know how many times she listened to me talk about something in the business or haggle something out or whatever. And so I know without her, I couldn't have gotten anywhere really. And then it would be Scott. And the reason I think Scott, who's my business partner, is that, we are very different. Scott likes to communicate in spreadsheets and I will pick up the phone, right? Just as like one example, right? And so when we are in the right when we are collaborating well, which we've learned to do a lot as the years and decades have gone by, we can provide very good counter arguments to each other's opinion that can be well received. In a way, I've never said it this way before, but in a way, read stuff you disagree with is like interact with someone you disagree with, if you get my drift, right? So like Scott will tend to look at a situation, his initial entry point into the atmosphere will be a very different one than mine. And yet we've come to really respect, in general, each other's kind of entry point. And then I think the company ends up benefiting. I'd say the only detriment to the company is that sometimes they have to wait for the two of us to kind of correlate on a decision when they might wish it could happen faster. But I'm just kind of like, well, tough cookies. Like it's going to be a better decision if we both agree about it anyway, and you're just going to have to wait. But yeah, I'd say those are the two people for sure.
Fantastic. Do you have any regrets?
Yeah, for sure. Everybody does, I think, who owns a business, because I think it goes back to the ego factory that can inflate or deflate you as a business. I mean, implicitly, obviously there's some regret about how much I let the first business kind of affect me. But I would say the second one is, and I hate to say it, but it's an ego thing again. There was a period where this was actually at the, for the sake of time, we don't have to get into the time frame, but it was during the entrepreneurial journey. I had the opportunity to do a lot of speaking engagements literally around the world. We had this book that we wrote, and it ended up in a bunch of editions, and it was really popular. And I was going around giving talks like all around the planet. And there were some things I missed with my kids that I wish I could have back, and I asked myself, why was I sitting in Singapore or Hong Kong in some hotel, waiting to give a speech, and I wasn't home to watch some little league practice, kind of thing. It goes back to saying no, right? I mean, do you really need to go give that talk, or do you just kind of want to give that talk? Yeah. Right. And yet on the other hand, we're supposed to feel a sense of pride and ownership in what we're doing. Right. So it's not like, you just sit in the living room all day and don't do anything. So, but there were definitely times that I think I could have traveled less, and I was doing the travel, for a mix of maybe trying to assure the business's success. And at the same time, I really enjoyed giving a lot of talks. But if I'd look back and said, did I need to give as many as I did? Probably not. And in the end, by the way, the coda to that is I did actually fundamentally decide to get off the road. And we launched a really strong marketing effort for the company 5, 6, 7 years ago, which led to lots and lots of great things from like a business standpoint. And I said, I'm just getting off this merry-go-round of giving talks around the world. But it's definitely something I wish I had back. I wish I'd made that decision to get off that conference track way earlier and just said, let's just go invest in more digital marketing and trust that'll work. Right. And I would have been home more as a result. Anyway.
No, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. I don't always get honest answers to that. So thank you very much. What are you most proud of?
If it's purely a business thing, I think it's the client list. And not because it's like, stickers on the NASCAR race car of the number of sponsors or something like that. It's not that. It's, although I could see people immediately thinking that, it's not that at all. It's like, wow, we've really helped this many organizations understand what's going on. Yeah. And it's partly why they're so prominent on the website, the logos, and it's partly, it just goes back to the service thing. I feel like I've been able to serve that many organizations effectively, and when I say me, I mean like the company, obviously, but like, there's, I think it's that reach, that we've been able to achieve in the second business that the first business was so eluded by. Like we were just tied to those two companies.
Yeah.
And so the ability to grow from two companies as big as they were to have a client list that's in the hundreds that still includes some of the big guys, which actually ties right back into the marketing, because it was driven by the marketing. That we made some really smart decisions strategically and tactically about how we set up kind of our marketing plans. And that was not something I necessarily knew how to do when we started. And I had some instincts and some ideas and got lucky on some of the decisions, and it ended up paying off. And so that's the fruits of that labor is probably one of the things I'm most proud of in the business at this point.
What does legacy to you?
Honestly, nobody's ever asked me that question. I mean, people have asked me in like an individual standpoint, of course, but like in a podcast interview, it just hasn't happened yet. So it's a good question. I think if I had to guess from like a business standpoint, like if what you're saying is, a little bit like we talked about earlier, right? The businesses aren't around forever. So someday this thing's gone and it has the digital tombstone of whatever it was, right? Whether that's 50 years from now and we sell it to somebody else or, whatever. I want people to really think we did the right thing all the time. I want people to think that we were fair and we were truthful, and basically they could trust us. Yeah. And I think that that's a big deal to me. And it plays out in all kinds of decisions we make around here regarding clients. But I'd say I'd sum it up. I mean, it sounds kind of simple, but I guess it's a trade-off because I've had longer answers to other things. I'd say I want them to have this memory of, I could really trust those guys. And if there was a second thing, gosh, they were pretty creative and smart, like they had good ideas and they helped us. So I would say though, first and foremost, that they have this memory that they could really trust us to do the right thing. And if we can leave that legacy, hey, we need more of those companies out there. So I'm cool with that.
So this is not one of the questions, and I know we've overrun, but I just want to ask this question. Would you describe yourself as a tech company or as a sort of market research company?
The latter. We're a market research company. Yeah. Right. Yeah. We serve tech, but it's a market research company for sure.
Okay, fantastic. Lastly, where can people find you if they want to reach out to you?
If you look up my name, I think I'm still roughly on the first page of Google. I think there's like a hockey player and some other people that are kind of like around me, but who knows? So you can probably dig up my profile somewhere, but if not, cascadeinsights.com. My email is just Sean, SEAN at cascadeinsights.com. Always happy to talk about, probably things that would be semi-obvious based on our conversation. And just reach out to me. Always happy to connect. And if you want to learn more about the company, just go to cascadeinsights.com and let us know what you're curious about.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean, for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've given such great insight and such. I feel we've been on a journey in this conversation. I feel you've really explained about decisions that you've made. And I'm just super pleased that Cascade Insights is being so successful and doing so well. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Really enjoyed the chat.
Pleasure. Cheers.